October 8, 1949, 6:15 p.m. Yankees locker room, before Game 5 of the World Series. Joe DiMaggio's fist connected with Yogi Berra's jaw. Blood poured from Yogi's split lip as he stumbled backward into the equipment rack. The evidence Joe had just found proved that Yogi had been selling Yankees game strategies to the Brooklyn Dodgers for $500 cash per game. A betrayal so shocking it nearly cost them the World Series and ended their friendship forever. This is the story of the biggest betrayal in baseball history, how America's most beloved catcher became a traitor to his own team, and why the Yankees covered up a scandal that could have destroyed their dynasty. It started 3 hours earlier. October 8, 1949, 3:30 p.m. Joe DiMaggio arrived at Yankee Stadium for what could be the most important game of the season. The Yankees were leading the World Series against the Brooklyn Dodgers 3-1. One more win would give them another championship. Joe was 34 years old and playing through constant pain. His knees hurt every morning. His back ached from years of diving catches. The doctors had told him this might be his last season. But Joe DiMaggio never showed weakness. He was the Yankees' captain, their leader, their symbol of excellence. Players looked up to him. Fans worshipped him. He was supposed to be perfect. As Joe walked into the locker room, he noticed something strange. Yogi Berra was sitting alone in the corner counting money. A lot of money. "Hey Yogi, what's all that cash?" Joe asked. Yogi quickly shoved the bills into his pocket. "Nothing, Joe. Just some money from my mom." Joe found this odd. Yogi's family wasn't wealthy. They lived in a small house in St. Louis. His father worked at a brick factory. Where would Yogi get so much cash? But Joe had other things on his mind. The team meeting was about to start. Manager Casey Stengel wanted to go over the game plan for facing the Dodgers' ace pitcher Don Newcomb. The Yankees gathered in the meeting room. Stengel spread out charts and diagrams on a large table. "Listen up, boys," Stengel said. "Newcomb's been throwing his fastball high and inside to our right-handed hitters, but we've figured out his pattern. In the first 3 innings, he starts lefties with a curveball. After the 4th inning, he goes to his changeup when he's behind in the count." Joe took careful notes. This was valuable information. Knowing a pitcher's patterns could be the difference between winning and losing. "One more thing," Stengel continued. "We're going to steal more bases today. Newcomb is slow to home plate. Phil, you and Joe are going to run on him early and often." Phil Rizzuto, the Yankees' shortstop, nodded. "Got it, Casey." The meeting lasted 30 minutes. The players discussed specific situations, defensive alignments, and batting strategies. Everything they talked about was confidential team information. After the meeting, the players began getting dressed for the game. Joe went to his locker and started putting on his uniform. That's when he noticed something that changed everything. As Joe was tying his cleats, he saw a piece of paper fall out of Yogi's equipment bag. The paper landed near Joe's feet. Joe picked it up. It was a handwritten note. At the top it said Brooklyn Dodgers Game 4 information. Joe's heart started racing. Why would Yogi have a note about the Dodgers? Joe read the note carefully. What he saw made him sick to his stomach. The note contained detailed information about Yankees' strategies. It described exactly what Stengel had told them about facing Dodgers pitchers. It included their base-stealing plans. It even had diagrams of their defensive alignments. At the bottom of the note there was a signature Y. Berra and a dollar amount, $500. Joe couldn't believe what he was seeing. Yogi Berra, his teammate, his friend, was selling Yankees secrets to their biggest rivals. Joe's hands were shaking as he read the note again. This wasn't just betrayal. This was treason against the team, against everything the Yankees stood for. Joe looked across the locker room at Yogi, who was getting dressed and acting like nothing was wrong. How long had this been going on? How many games had they lost because Yogi was feeding information to their enemies? Joe thought about all the close games against the Dodgers this season. Games where it seemed like Brooklyn knew exactly what the Yankees were going to do. Games where Dodgers hitters were sitting on specific pitches. Games where their runners were in perfect position to steal bases. Now it all made sense. Yogi had been betraying them all season long. Joe felt rage building inside him. He had played with Yogi for 3 years. They had won 2 World Series together. Joe had defended Yogi when other players criticized his catching. He had helped Yogi improve his hitting. He had treated him like a brother. And Yogi had stabbed him in the back for money. Joe folded the note and put it in his pocket. He needed to confront Yogi, but he had to be smart about it. If other players saw them fighting, it could destroy team morale right before the biggest game of the season. Joe waited until most of the players had left the locker room. Only a few guys were still getting dressed. Yogi was sitting on the bench in front of his locker, putting on his chest protector. Joe walked over to Yogi. His heart was pounding, but he kept his voice calm. "Yogi, we need to talk." Yogi looked up. "Sure, Joe. What's up?" Joe pulled out the note and held it in front of Yogi's face. "What is this?" Yogi's eyes went wide. His face turned pale. He knew he had been caught. "Joe, I can explain." "Explain what?" Joe's voice was getting louder. "Explain how you've been selling our secrets to the Dodgers. Explain how you've been betraying your own teammates." Yogi stood up. He was shorter than Joe, but he was built like a tank. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Joe shouted. "You're a traitor." Other players in the locker room stopped what they were doing. They could hear Joe yelling, but they couldn't understand what was happening. "Joe, listen to me," Yogi said. "I needed the money. My family is struggling. My dad got hurt at work and can't pay the bills." "So you decided to destroy the team?" Joe was furious. "You decided to cost us games? You decided to help our enemies?" "It was just little things," Yogi said. "Nothing that would really hurt us." "Nothing that would hurt us?" Joe couldn't believe what he was hearing. "We're in the World Series, Yogi. Every piece of information matters. Every advantage counts." Joe thought about Game 2 of the World Series. The Dodgers had seemed to know exactly what Yankees pitchers were going to throw. Brooklyn hitters were ready for every pitch. Now Joe knew why. "How much money did they pay you?" Joe demanded. Yogi looked down. $500 per game." "Per game?" Joe was shocked. "How many games, Yogi?" "Since July," Yogi mumbled. Joe did the math in his head. The Yankees had played the Dodgers 6 times since July, plus 4 World Series games. That was 10 games. $5,000 total. "You sold out your team for $5,000? Joe, you don't understand. You make more money than any of us. You have endorsement deals. You don't know what it's like to worry about money." This made Joe even angrier. "So because I work hard and make more money, that gives you the right to betray the team?" "It's not betrayal," Yogi protested. "I never gave them anything that would make us lose. You gave them our strategies. You told them our plans. How is that not betrayal?" Joe was yelling now. His voice echoed through the locker room. Every player could hear him, but nobody could see what was happening because Joe and Yogi were in a corner behind a row of lockers. "You backstabbing traitor!" Joe shouted. That's when Joe lost control. 3 years of friendship, trust, and loyalty exploded into pure rage. Joe's fist connected with Yogi's jaw. Blood poured from Yogi's split lip as he stumbled backward into the equipment rack. Bats and gloves crashed to the floor. Yogi wiped blood from his mouth. He looked stunned, not just from the punch, but from seeing Joe so angry. "Joe, I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this." Joe grabbed Yogi by the shirt. "Sorry doesn't undo the games you cost us. Sorry doesn't bring back the trust you destroyed." Yogi tried to push Joe away, but Joe was stronger and more furious. Joe shoved Yogi hard against the lockers. The metal doors rattled loudly. "How could you do this to us?" Joe demanded. "How could you do this to me?" By now, other players had heard the commotion and came running over. Phil Rizzuto was the first to see what was happening. "Joe, Yogi, what's going on?" Joe was still holding Yogi against the lockers. "Tell them, Yogi. Tell them what you've been doing." Yogi's lip was swelling up. Blood dripped onto his uniform. He looked at the other players who had gathered around. "I made a mistake," Yogi said quietly. "A mistake?" Joe yelled. "You call selling team secrets a mistake?" The other players gasped. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. "What are you talking about?" asked Tommy Henrik, the Yankees' right fielder. Joe pulled out the note and showed it to everyone. "Yogi's been selling our strategies to the Dodgers. He's been taking money to betray the team." The locker room went silent. Players stared at Yogi in shock and disbelief. Whitey Ford, a young pitcher, spoke first. "Yogi, is this true?" Yogi nodded slowly. He couldn't look anyone in the eyes. "How could you do this?" Phil Rizzuto asked. He looked hurt and confused. "I needed the money," Yogi repeated. "We all need money," shouted Bobby Brown, the Yankees' third baseman. "But we don't sell out our teammates." The players were getting angrier as they understood what had happened. Yogi had betrayed all of them, not just Joe. "How long has this been going on?" asked Vic Raschke, one of the Yankees' best pitchers. "Since July," Joe answered for Yogi. "July?" Raschke was furious. That explains why the Dodgers seemed to know all our pitches in August. The players started putting pieces together. Games where their strategies hadn't worked. Games where opponents seemed to be one step ahead. Games they should have won but somehow lost. This is why we struggled against Brooklyn all season, said Johnny Mize, the Yankees' first baseman. Manager Casey Stengel heard the noise and came into the locker room. When he saw Yogi's bloody face and all the players gathered around, he knew something serious had happened. "What's going on here?" Stengel demanded. Joe handed Stengel the note. "Yogi's been selling our game plans to the Dodgers." Stengel read the note carefully, his face turned red with anger. In 30 years of baseball, he had never seen anything like this. "Yogi, is this true?" Yogi nodded. Stengel was quiet for a long moment. Then he exploded. "Are you out of your mind?" Stengel yelled. "We're in the World Series, we're one game away from winning the championship, and you've been helping our enemies?" "Casey, I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it." Stengel was as angry as Joe had been. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you understand how this affects the team?" Yogi was crying now. The tough catcher who had faced the hardest pitchers in baseball was breaking down like a child. "I just needed money for my family." "Then you should have come to me," Stengel shouted. "You should have come to the front office. You don't betray your teammates." The Yankees' general manager George Weiss had heard the commotion and came down to the locker room. When Stengel explained what had happened, Weiss went pale. "This is a disaster," Weiss said. "If this gets out, it will destroy the franchise." "What do we do?" Stengel asked. Joe spoke up. "We need to suspend him. We need to kick him off the team." "We can't," Weiss said. "Not right now. We're in the middle of the World Series. If we suspend our starting catcher, the press will ask questions. They'll want to know why. The story will come out. So we just pretend nothing happened?" Joe was incredulous. "For now, yes," Weiss said. "We'll deal with this after the World Series." Joe couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want to keep playing with a traitor?" "We don't have a choice," Stengel said. "If this story breaks now, it will destroy team morale. It will distract everyone from the game. We might lose the World Series." Joe looked around at his teammates. Some of them nodded, understanding the difficult situation. Others looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. "This is wrong," Joe said. "It's temporary," Weiss assured him. "After we win the championship, we'll figure out what to do with Yogi." Joe stared at Yogi, who was still bleeding and crying. Part of him wanted to hit Yogi again. Part of him wanted to throw him out of the stadium, but part of him also felt sorry for his teammate. Joe had known Yogi for 3 years. He knew about Yogi's poor family. He knew how hard it was for players to make money in those days. Baseball salaries were much lower than they would become in later decades. But that didn't excuse betrayal. That didn't excuse selling out the team. "If we're going to keep this quiet," Joe said, "then everyone in this room needs to promise never to talk about it. Not to reporters, not to friends, not to family. This secret stays in this room." All the players agreed. They understood that protecting the team was more important than individual feelings. Stengel looked at his watch. It was almost time for the game to start. "Everyone get ready," he said. "We still have a World Series to win." The players began finishing their preparations, but the atmosphere in the locker room had changed completely. The excitement and confidence from earlier was gone. Now there was tension, distrust, and anger. Joe couldn't look at Yogi without feeling rage. Yogi kept trying to make eye contact with Joe, but Joe turned away every time. As the team walked onto the field for Game 5, Joe made a decision. He was going to play the best game of his life. He was going to prove that Yankees could win despite Yogi's betrayal. He was going to show everyone what loyalty and integrity looked like. The game began at 7:30 p.m. 68,000 fans packed Yankee Stadium. Millions more listened on radio. None of them knew about the drama that had just unfolded in the locker room. Joe came to bat in the first inning with 2 runners on base. He was still angry, but he channeled that anger into focus. He studied Dodgers pitcher Don Newcomb carefully. Newcomb threw a fastball high and inside, exactly where the Yankees scouting report said he would start right-handed hitters. Joe was ready for it. Joe drove the ball into the gap in left center field. Both runners scored easily, and Joe ended up on second base with a double. The crowd went wild. As Joe stood on second base, he looked toward the Yankees' dugout. Yogi was putting on his catcher's gear, getting ready to take the field. Joe felt sick watching him. In the bottom of the second inning, Joe made a spectacular diving catch in center field that saved 2 runs. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. But Joe wasn't playing for the crowd. He was playing for his teammates who had remained loyal. He was playing to prove that integrity mattered more than money. Yogi caught the entire game behind home plate. He called pitches and threw out base runners just like always. To the fans he looked normal, but his teammates could see that something was different. Yogi kept looking toward center field at Joe. He wanted to apologize, to make things right somehow, but Joe refused to acknowledge him. The Yankees won the game 10-6, clinching their second consecutive World Series championship. The players celebrated on the field as fans rushed onto the grass, but Joe DiMaggio didn't celebrate. He walked straight to the locker room, changed clothes quickly, and left the stadium without talking to anyone. The next day, newspapers across the country celebrated the Yankees' World Series victory. Headlines praised the team's talent and determination. Sports writers called it one of the greatest championships in baseball history. None of them knew about Yogi Berra's betrayal. General manager George Weiss kept his promise. 3 days after the World Series ended, he called Yogi into his office. "Yogi, we need to discuss what happened." Yogi sat in a chair across from Weiss's desk. He looked nervous and ashamed. "I know I made a big mistake, Mr. Weiss." "Mistake?" Weiss was stern. "What you did wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. It was potentially criminal. I just needed money." "That's not an excuse," Weiss interrupted. "What you did could have cost us the World Series. It could have destroyed careers. It could have ruined the franchise." Yogi was quiet. "However," Weiss continued, "we're not going to make this public. The story would hurt baseball, and it would hurt your teammates who had nothing to do with your actions." Yogi looked up hopefully. "But there will be consequences," Weiss said firmly. "You're being fined your entire World Series bonus. That's $5,000, exactly the amount you received from the Dodgers." Yogi nodded. He had expected to be suspended or even kicked off the team. "You're also going to write a letter of apology to every player on the team. You're going to explain your actions and promise that nothing like this will ever happen again." "Yes, sir." And Yogi, Weiss added, "If anything like this ever happens again, you'll be banned from baseball for life. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "It will never happen again." Weiss dismissed Yogi from his office, but the punishment wasn't over. Joe DiMaggio refused to speak to Yogi for the rest of the season. When they passed each other in the clubhouse, Joe looked the other way. When reporters asked Joe about Yogi's performance, Joe gave short, professional answers without any warmth. The other players followed Joe's lead. They were polite to Yogi during games, but they didn't trust him. They didn't include him in team meals or social gatherings. Yogi had become an outsider on his own team. The isolation was harder for Yogi than any official punishment would have been. He had grown up in a close Italian-American family where loyalty was everything. Now he was surrounded by teammates who saw him as a traitor. Yogi tried repeatedly to apologize to Joe. He left notes in Joe's locker. He tried to talk to him before and after games. He even asked other players to intervene on his behalf. But Joe refused to forgive him. "Trust is like a mirror," Joe told Phil Rizzuto. "Once it's broken, you can put the pieces back together, but you'll always see the cracks." The 1950 season was difficult for both players. Joe played brilliantly, having one of the best years of his career, but he seemed more distant from his teammates. Yogi also played well, but he was clearly affected by the isolation. He made more errors than usual and seemed distracted. The Yankees won another World Series in 1950, but there was no joy in the victory for either Joe or Yogi. After the season ended, Joe announced his retirement. He was only 36 years old, but his body was worn out from 13 seasons of professional baseball. At Joe's retirement ceremony, Yogi tried one more time to apologize. "Joe, please. I know what I did was wrong. I've regretted it every day for 2 years. Can't we be friends again?" Joe looked at Yogi for a long moment. "Yogi, you're a good player. You're going to have a great career. But I can't forget what you did. I can't pretend it didn't happen. I was desperate, Joe. My family needed money." "There were other ways to get money," Joe said. "You could have asked for help. You could have gotten a job in the off-season. You didn't have to betray the team." Yogi's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Joe. I'm so sorry." Joe put his hand on Yogi's shoulder. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't change what happened." That was the last conversation Joe DiMaggio and Yogi Berra had for 15 years. Joe went on to live a quiet retirement. He worked as a coach and instructor for the Yankees. He married Marilyn Monroe in 1954, though that marriage lasted less than a year. He became a symbol of class and dignity in baseball. Yogi continued playing for the Yankees until 1963. He became one of the greatest catchers in baseball history, winning 3 Most Valuable Player awards and 10 World Series championships. But the betrayal of 1949 haunted both men for decades. In 1965, 16 years after the locker room fight, Joe and Yogi encountered each other at an old-timers game at Yankee Stadium. They were both older now. Joe was 50. Yogi was 40. They had lived separate lives, but they shared memories that no one else could understand. "Hello, Joe," Yogi said quietly. "Hello, Yogi," Joe replied. They talked for a few minutes about baseball, about their families, about their lives after the game. The conversation was polite but distant. As they were about to part ways, Yogi said, "Joe, I want you to know that selling those secrets was the biggest mistake of my life, not just because it hurt the team, but because it cost me your friendship." Joe nodded. "I know, Yogi. Do you think we could ever be friends again?" Joe was quiet for a moment. "Yogi, I've forgiven you, but friendship requires trust, and trust is something that, once broken, can never be completely repaired." "I understand," Yogi said. They shook hands and went their separate ways. In later years, both men spoke publicly about the importance of integrity in sports. Neither ever told the complete story of what happened in 1949, but both used it as a lesson about the consequences of betrayal. Joe DiMaggio died in 1999 at age 84. Among the mourners at his funeral was Yogi Berra, who wept openly as he remembered his former teammate. Yogi lived until 2015, reaching age 90. In interviews late in his life, reporters sometimes asked him about his relationship with Joe DiMaggio. "Joe was the best teammate I ever had," Yogi would say. "He was a great player and a great man." The story of their fight became a legend within baseball circles. It was whispered about in locker rooms and front offices. It became a cautionary tale about loyalty and betrayal. Today, both players are remembered as Yankees legends. But for those who knew the real story, their legacy includes a lesson about integrity and the permanent damage that betrayal can cause. The fight in the Yankees locker room on October 8, 1949, lasted only a few minutes, but its effects lasted a lifetime, serving as a reminder that in sports, as in life, character matters more than cash. If this story of betrayal, forgiveness, and the price of integrity moved you, subscribe for more untold stories of how sports legends faced their greatest moral challenges, like this video. If you believe Joe DiMaggio was right to never fully forgive Yogi's betrayal, and comment below, could you forgive a friend who betrayed your trust for money? Next week, we're revealing another story of how a sports friendship was destroyed by greed and the choices that followed both players for the rest of their lives. Remember, trust takes years to build but can be destroyed in a single moment, and some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal.